Welcome to Chronicles of Crime, Untold Investigations. In today's episode, we're going to delve into the heinous and blood-curdling chronicle of one man's descent into violent mayhem. We unravel the mystery of Richard Cottingham, notoriously dubbed the Torso Killer. His gruesome campaign of terror spanned over a decade, leaving communities gripped with fear and authorities bewildered. Join us as we step back in time into the shadows to uncover his twisted path and the deafening decades of silence that followed. Stay with us as we unfold a story not for the faint of heart. In the quiet suburbs of New Jersey, Richard Francis Cottingham grew up beneath the innocuous veil of middle-class America. Born on November 25, 1946 in the Bronx, he was the firstborn of a typical family. Cottingham's childhood, at a glance, seemed the very picture of normality. Moving to River Vale, New Jersey, the young Cottingham began a life that, to neighbors and school friends, appeared utterly unremarkable. Yet, beneath this facade, darker currents swirled. At school, Richard was known to keep to himself, often struggling to forge friendships with his peers. Perhaps it was these struggles with connection that led him down the rabbit holes of his more sinister hobbies. Cottingham developed a fixation with bondage pornography, an interest that he confessed ignited arousal and fascination from a very young age. Completing his education at Pascack Valley High School, Cottingham seemed to launch into a stable career path. Following in his father's footsteps, he landed a job at the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company and later worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield as a computer operator. His profession was as mundane and inconspicuous as they come, far from the shadows he would eventually become known to dwell in. On the surface, Cottingham settled down into married life, fathering 3 children, the seeming picture of an American family man. Yet his ordinary life was a front. As Cottingham donned the mask of normalcy, his true self, a persona marred by a predilection for control, torture, and unspeakable acts, simmered beneath. This dichotomy, a day-to-day life of an average Joe against the backdrop of a disturbed internal world, was a riddle that few could guess, and even fewer would want to unravel. It was in this unsuspecting setting that the stage was set for one of the most notorious crime sprees in the annals of American criminal history. The question beckons, how could a man with such a twisted double life escape suspicion for so long? How many passed him on the street, interacted with him, without ever sensing the darkness lurking behind the facade of Richard Cottingham, the family man, the computer operator, the torso killer? Imagine this ordinary scene. A husband and father clocks out after a long day of working with computers, returns to his suburban home, greets his kids, and shares dinner with his family. Sounds normal, right? But this facade of a typical white picket fence life was exactly what Richard Cottingham, a man with a heinous secret, counted on to deceive those around him. By day, Cottingham was a computer operator, a man of digits and data, someone's colleague, someone's neighbor. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a monstrous alter ego emerged. Cottingham's double life began at a young age. As a married man and father of 3, one could presume his life was filled with mundane parental duties and spousal affection. However, this was not the case for Cottingham. After the birth of his 3rd child, when his wife sought intimacy, Cottingham turned cold, citing mental cruelty. His nights weren't spent at home but wandering, often until the early hours. And while his wife perceived this as abandonment, the truth was far more sinister. What's chilling is the proximity of his 2 worlds. While holding a steady job at Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, Cottingham inhabited an office space alongside Rodney Alcala, another serial killer. It's a thought that sends shivers down your spine. 2 predators unbeknownst to each other's darkness, hiding in plain sight. And just as Cottingham played the role of the family man, he skillfully evaded the suspicions of law enforcement. Despite brushes with the law, he was convicted of petty theft and had charges levied against him for more serious offenses. He slipped through the fingers of justice time and again. His demeanor and his stability in his day job likely helped him avoid closer scrutiny. Ironically, The very image of a stable family man that protected him also contributed to his eventual downfall. The night of his capture, having left his family at home, he embarked on another hunt, inevitably leading to the horrific events in room 117. That's when the scales tipped, the mask fell off, and Richard Cottingham's sinister double life was exposed for all the world to see. The life of Richard Cottingham was not without its irregularities, even before the full extent of his horrific deeds came to light. It's intriguing, almost baffling, to see how someone could slip through the cracks of law enforcement time and time again. Between 1969 and 1974, a string of arrests painted the picture of a man troubled by the law, but these surface disturbances didn't hint at the storm raging underneath. In late 1969, it started with a drunk driving charge in New York City, a fine of $50, but no deeper inquiry. By August of 1972, he's caught shoplifting in a New Jersey department store. It's a mere slap on the wrist, another $50 fine or 10 days behind bars. These are petty crimes, yes, but they're the ripples on the water's surface that suggested something more ominous lurked below. Only a year passes before more serious charges surface: robbery, oral sodomy, and sexual abuse, following an altercation with a prostitute and her pimp. The charges fall apart when his accusers vanish from the legal process, leaving Cottingham in the clear. Such a pattern continues, with a strikingly similar set of charges emerging the very next year. Again, the case disintegrates when the victim chooses not to appear in court. What stands out is not just the nature of these arrests, but the repetition, the cycle of violence building beneath Cottingham's facade of normalcy. It's chilling to consider this incremental escalation of aggression and how it slipped through society's fingers. His crimes, undoubtedly violent and indicative of a man spiraling out of control, went not just unpunished, but essentially unnoticed in the grand scheme of criminal behavior. It was these missed connections that allowed Richard Cottingham's true nature to remain hidden, enabling a murderous streak that would go on to claim the lives of many. In the pre-dawn calm of May 22, 1980, the streets were eerily silent, unaware that a shocking turn of events was about to unfold. Richard Cottingham, a predator cloaked in normalcy, hunted his next victim, an 18-year-old called Leslie Ann Odell. As night's cloak began to recede, Cottingham lured her into a trap at the Hasbrook Heights Quality Inn, room 117, a setting poised to become the stage of his downfall. In the confines of that nondescript motel room, Odell, expecting a client, found herself face to face with her worst nightmare. Cottingham's dark, monstrous nature came into the light as he revealed his instruments of torture: a knife, handcuffs, and a chilling eagerness to impose agony, mirroring the torment he inflicted on countless before her. Cottingham was no amateur. His cruel ministrations were systematic, born of a twisted compulsion to dominate and degrade. But in a fortuitous twist of fate, Odell's survival instinct kicked in with a scream that shattered the silence of the night. Her outcry a beacon of hope in the darkest hour. Her will to live summoned the motel's night shift employees, who became the inadvertent heralds of justice, as their quick reaction brought the police crashing through the door. It was in those tense moments following his arrest, as he stood in the hallway, surrounded by law enforcement, that the heinous breadth of Cottingham's sinister life began to unfurl. The unnerving sight of his arsenal, a stockpile of prescription drugs, replica pistols, and mementos of his grim deeds, left an indelible mark on the minds of the arresting officers. Handcuffed and stripped of his power, Cottingham's decades-long reign of terror was finally brought to an end. The twisted irony did not escape those present. The handcuffs now clasped around his wrists symbolized not only the end of his freedom, but also the start of a long overdue justice for his victims, whose unanswered cries echoed through the years. The arrest that morning was not just a capture of a macabre murderer. It was the first step in a long, cathartic journey for the survivors and families left in the wake of Cottingham's brutal legacy. As we turn the page on the disturbing narrative of Richard Cottingham, we come across a chapter that is as tough as it is crucial: the stories of the survivors. These are the voices of the women who stared into the abyss of human depravity and lived to tell the tale. Let's begin with Leslie Ann Odell, an 18-year-old whose encounter with Cottingham nearly cost her life. Tricked and trapped in a motel room, she experienced the unimaginable horror of a predator's torture. Cottingham threatened her, harmed her, tried to dehumanize her. But Odell's spirit, her sheer will to live, triggered her to fight back, to scream for help. Her actions brought motel employees to her rescue, leading to Cottingham's arrest. Despite the terror she endured, Odell's bravery in that moment of crisis was a turning point. It brings the motel's walls to bear witness to her strength. Recall the haunting accounts of Susan Geiger and Karen Schilt, two more survivors who took the stand against Cottingham in court. Their narratives reveal not just a criminal's cruelty, but also the unyielding courage of his victims. Susan, who awoke to a nightmare of blood and brutality, still found the power within her to survive and seek justice. And Karen, a young waitress pregnant at the time of her abduction, suffered a fate that's hard to fathom. Left for dead in a sewer, exposed and assaulted, she found a way to survive through a nightmarish evening that would have broken many. But Karen, like Susan, bore witness to her own story, identified Cottingham, and helped seal his fate behind bars. These women, and others like Pamela Weisenfeld, who passed through Cottingham's grip and emerged scarred but undeterred, are pillars of resilience. Their testimonies not only brought a monster to justice, but also shone a light on the power of the human spirit. In a saga darkened by unspeakable acts, the courage of these survivors offers a beacon of hope. They remind us that even in our most vulnerable moments, bravery can be as boundless as the heart's capacity to heal. Their voices, though emerging from a tragedy, sing a song of survival, and we must listen in reverence and acknowledgement. Richard Cottingham's trial and subsequent convictions truly laid bare the monstrous reality of a man who, until then, managed to maintain a veneer of normalcy. As the gavel sounded in those New Jersey courtrooms, the dual life of this seemingly average computer operator and family man was expertly deconstructed by the relentless efforts of prosecutors and investigators. Forensic evidence, including an incriminating fingerprint lifted from a ratchet mechanism of handcuffs, bore silent testimony to his heinous acts. The poignant and brave testimonies of survivors, scarred yet unbroken, spoke volumes of Cottingham's cruel predations. The prosecution didn't rely on these elements alone, though. An array of experts was summoned to painstakingly paint a picture of Cottingham's signature methodology, a damning litany of bondage, torture, and mutilation that left an indelible stamp on the psyche of the court. Legal strategy was critical, and Cottingham's defense was dismantled piece by piece. Every alibi was countered. Every attempt at casting doubt was met with incontrovertible evidence. As the jury's verdicts were read aloud, guilty on multiple counts of murder, it became clear that justice, though it had tarried, had not been denied. The convictions were a testament to dogged police work, prosecutorial acuity, and the resilience of human spirits that refused to be extinguished. Here sat Cottingham, now unmasked as the monster he was, sentenced to spend his remaining days confined within the same prison walls he had sentenced his victims to, walls of terror and despair. As the years stretched on, even after Richard Cottingham was safely behind bars, the ghostly chill of his heinous acts lingered. The families of unsolved cases yearned for closure, their wounds left festering by the gnawing agony of the unknown. But this is where the story takes a turn toward a semblance of resolution. Enter Robert Ancelotti, a detective with a fire in his heart for justice, who wasn't content with merely closing the book on Cottingham's known crimes. Despite Cottingham's claims of innocence, his fortress of lies began to crumble in 2009, under the persistent siege of Ancelotti's interrogations. It was like watching the high walls of an impenetrable castle being worn down, stone by stone, until in a sudden, dramatic collapse, Cottingham finally admitted to committing 5 murders he was initially accused of decades prior. And the confessions didn't end there. Fast forward to April 2021, and we find Cottingham cornered by the weight of his past, confessing to the double homicide in Montvale, one of New Jersey's paramount cold cases. It seemed that his time in prison, combined with Anzelotti's relentless pursuit, had stirred something in Cottingham. Perhaps it was a search for a sliver of redemption or the haunting burden of his conscience that led him to reveal the dark secrets he'd held onto for years. Cottingham's confessions peeled back layers on cases that had become nothing more than dusty files in the back corners of the police archives. His admissions provided a bittersweet sense of peace for those who had been left to wonder what had become of their loved ones. The work of Ancelotti and his team exemplified an unyielding dedication to the victims and an unwavering commitment to the pursuit of truth, proving that justice, while sometimes delayed, is determined in its march and unwearied by the passage of time. As a postscript to this startling breakthrough, the BCPO's guarded knowledge of the exceptional closures to 3 murders, initially kept from the public, serves as testament to the delicate and strategic game of cat and mouse played between detectives and a killer whose infamy had become inscribed in the annals of true crime. These cold case breakthroughs stand as a beacon of hope, a reminder that no matter how cold a case may turn, the warmth of justice prevails, igniting closure for those who've weathered the daunting storm in the wake of a true monster. The name Richard Cottingham might not ring a bell at first, but mention the torso killer, and a chill runs down the spine of those familiar with his dark legacy. This man's cruel and violent reign over the tri-state area isn't just a sorrowful chapter in criminal history. It's a wound that still affects the communities long after his incarceration. For over a decade, Cottingham stalked the streets, hunting for his victims, leaving a trail of horror that has yet to fully heal. Young lives were savagely cut short, dreams shattered, and families left with an unspeakable void. The sheer brutality of his actions, the mutilation, the inhumanity, was a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk behind the friendly facade of a neighbor, a co-worker, even a family member. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of Cottingham's spree is not just the number of lives he stole or the terror he inflicted. It's the lingering question of how many more victims are out there, their stories untold, their fates unknown. The investigations continue to this day, with detectives piecing together cold cases that whisper the possibility of his involvement. Each potential revelation offers a mix of dread and desperate hope for a closure that's been decades in the making. And as we delve deeper into these investigations, we catch glimpses of resilience amid the ruin, communities that rallied together in the aftermath, families that never stopped striving for justice, and survivors who bravely shared their harrowing stories, hoping to prevent this nightmare from touching another soul. Richard Cottingham's spree may be over, but his legacy of terror endures, a stark warning that sometimes the most ordinary exterior can hide a monstrous truth. And it's this understanding that perhaps now, more than ever, we must cling to the unwavering light of humanity to dispel the shadows cast by such unimaginable darkness. The torso killer, Richard Cottingham, has been a subject of grim fascination in popular culture. His crimes were so brutal and cold-hearted that they've been dissected and deliberated across various forms of media. Books have been written, with detailed accounts attempting to map the psyche of the man behind these heinous acts. The Prostitute Murders, The People vs. Richard Cottingham by Rod Leith, for example, offers an in-depth look at the case from an investigative perspective, seeking to understand the deep-rooted motives of Cottingham's violence. Moreover, the world of streaming has brought Cottingham's chilling legacy to a new audience. The Netflix series Crime Scene: The Times Square Killer delves into the grimy underbelly of 1970s New York, crafting a visual narrative that juxtaposes the neon lights of Times Square with the darkness of Cottingham's actions. Similarly, Investigation Discovery's special episode, The Times Square Killer, and Hulu's The Torso Killer Confessions have presented these crimes to audiences, cementing Cottingham's place in the pantheon of notorious American serial killers. Through these retellings, we see the role media plays in shaping the narrative of true crime, often straddling the line between raising awareness and possibly glorifying the criminal. It's a delicate balance, telling these stories responsibly without making a spectacle of the violence that was perpetrated. As we dissect Cottingham's morbid legacy, it becomes more important than ever to remember the victims, the lives cut tragically short, and the suffering of those they left behind. The media opens a window to these dark chapters in history, but it's our collective memory and the stories we choose to pass on that will define the enduring legacy of crimes like those committed by the Torso Killer. Thanks for joining us on Chronicles of Crime Untold Investigations. We've traveled through the grim saga of Richard Cottingham, his mundane beginnings, his deceptive double life, and the unraveling that led to his capture. It's chilling, the stark contrast between the man who went to work every day and the one who committed unspeakable acts at night. Today's episode is a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the shadows that can lurk behind the facade of normalcy. Stay aware, stay safe, and keep tuning in as we bring more untold investigations to light. Until next time, be well, and remember to keep an eye on the darkness that might be hiding in plain sight.